I'm the Assistant Director for Partnerships and Civic Engagement for the National Park Service. Been in DC about a year and a half and came from Golden Gate. I did 28 and a half years at Golden Gate, and my experience in interpretation and education was over 20 years there. The last almost 10 years was in communications, and so I worked very closely in a lot of partnership situations at Golden Gate as it related to especially education. Golden Gate is a large national recreation area. I had a budget of about $1.8 million for interpretation and education, and about 98% of that, honestly, was staff, which meant we had to use our friends groups, our concessionaires, our entrance fee money, etc., to help fund our education and interpretation programs almost in its entirety. And it's actually kind of fun for me to be here. The countdown clock at the top there is for America's Summit on National Parks, coming up in a couple of weeks, which Derek has helped put together. Derek may not remember this, but I actually started working with him way back at our Vail conference in 1991. What better place to plan the future of the Park Service than a ski resort in Colorado? It was an amazing conference. I went back and looked at some of the paperwork on it, and we talked about partners, we talked about interpretation and education. Little did we know that over 20 years later we'd be so relying on our partners to move forward, especially our education programming. My work at Golden Gate involved working with Headlands Institute, which is now Nature Bridge. You'll meet Vanessa in a minute about talking about that program. Residential campus, we couldn't do it in the Park Service. We absolutely do not have the resources. We have to have partners to do residential campuses for education programming. When I got to Golden Gate, our education programming was ranger guided tours. There was no curriculum-based education programs. There was no pre-site visits to the schools. There was no post-site visits. We relied on the National Park Foundation, the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy, and our other partners to help us provide the background and materials and stuff that we needed to develop these programs. One of my favorites, I'll just tell you kind of a personal story, is on Alcatraz. We developed a middle school education curriculum program, the history of California, and we used Alcatraz as its basis. But what was really exciting is I got into Alcatraz and we were not allowed to talk about prisons today. We were not allowed to talk about human rights. We were not allowed to talk about the Indian occupation, with the exception of how the island was destroyed and kind of began a civil rights movement, but we didn't really talk about it. Well, we worked with the National Park Foundation to develop curriculum-based materials, and we have this program called Unlocking Alcatraz. And the high school students pick to either be a Native American or to be a prisoner. And they have a pre-site visit by a ranger or volunteer, and they bring a curriculum set of materials with them, and the students have to prepare in advance. And they come out to the island and they spend an entire day on the island recording their experiences, following the ranger programs, taking the audio tour, etc., and really exploring Alcatraz as part of the curriculum materials. There's teacher workshops to prepare the teachers because it's rather an unusual workshop. At the end of the day, they go back to their classroom, and this is what really frightens the history teachers, is the students make masks of themselves, and they paint the masks to what they experienced on the island. And so they use a lot of red paints if they're talking about the Indian occupation, a lot of black, a lot of stripes, things like that, if they're talking about being a prisoner. And it's been really remarkable because the masks have been displayed on the island, and a lot of the students bring their parents to the island to actually see this exhibit area with these masks. And we were talking to some of the teachers afterwards. We did a post-workshop the first couple of years to find out how it worked. And one of the teachers said it dramatically changed the way I interface with the class for the rest of the year. Our relationship changed because of the visit to Alcatraz. And it turned out that we really target underserved communities in bringing them to the island. We pay for the buses through our foundation. We paid for the boats to Alcatraz if they can't afford it. We paid for all the curriculum materials needed, including the mask making equipment if they can't afford it. Again, this is not federal money for any of this I just described. But there were a couple of masks that were sewn up with pieces of metal or pieces of barbed wire or things like that. Or some didn't even have any mouse at all. And we asked the students, why did you do that? And they said, well, when you were a prisoner in Alcatraz, the first 5 years it was open as a federal prison, you couldn't talk. And that's how I feel. Nobody would listen to me. It was pretty dramatic. What was really cool with some of the teachers is, especially in some of the Oakland schools, these students came from Central America, and mask making was a way of communicating. And what happened is some of the really quiet, shy students in the classrooms made some of the most unbelievably beautiful and evocative masks. And the teachers said from that point on, those students participated fully in the class for the rest of the year. It was really dramatic. Now, we couldn't have done that in the Park Service by ourselves. We would never have the money to do that by ourselves. Our concessions provided discounts for the students to come out to the island through our concessions contract. We use fee demonstration money for some of our programming on Alcatraz to pay for exhibits on the island. We use money from the audio tour and the bookstores on Alcatraz through our conservancy, and the curriculum materials were developed by the National Park Foundation as parks as classrooms. It was a win-win all the way around. And so we really relied on these revenue sources to help us to move forward. So I'm a firm believer in doing that. Our foundation used money from Alcatraz to develop curriculum programs. We have a high school in Daly City with a native plant nursery in the high school. And the students have to, as part of their curriculum, have to go out and collect seeds and cuttings from the park under supervision of a ranger or volunteer. They actually bring them in, grow them in the nursery, and then they outplant them into areas of the park where we're doing native plant restoration. We use the same students to remove exotic plants. And we tell them why we're doing that, restoring the watersheds, those kind of things. Again, all of the supplies and materials to support that program come through Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. It's just really critical we have that kind of support. Chrissy Field Center at Golden Gate, same way. The center itself is staffed by park rangers and conservancy employees and volunteers, but the entire program for that facility comes through fees, concessions, food service, and all of our partners and foundations. So our education programming isn't anymore just field trips coming in, it's curriculum-based, and it's really crucial. And that's why it's exciting to be on a panel like this and to hear some of the other ways that we're bringing people to our federal lands through these funding sources that we wouldn't have in government. We should have the uniform ranger, we should have the volunteer there, we should have the conservancy employee, but we have to bring all these revenue sources together to help provide interpretation and education. So I'm excited to be on this panel. I come from the partnership office in DC for the National Park Service, and partners are the way we're getting a lot of things done now, and we're going to be doing a lot more in the future. The Summit on America's National Parks in just 14 days and 7 hours is going to kick off the future of the Park Service for the next century when we turn 100 years old. And a lot of that is going to be through partnerships, and a lot of that is going to involve interpretation and education. So with that, I'd like to introduce the first panel speaker. You've met him already, Frank Peterson. A little bit of his bio that wasn't mentioned this morning. He joined the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation as President and CEO in February 2007. And he brings over 20 years of leadership and expertise in business development to the organization. Before that, he was Vice President and General Manager of Marketing General Incorporated, America's largest and most successful association marketing agency. So he's got a lot of background, and we're going to have an incredible presentation by him. Frank.
Wow, incredible. I almost tripped off the stage. Well, good morning again. And what I'm going to focus on here is an educational partnership that we have developed with Discovery Communications and their Discovery Education Partners. And as the group before us talked about, and we recognize at the AFL, that it's important that we get kids engaged in outdoor activities, physical activity, health, concentration, learning, all are influenced by participating more in outdoor activities. And as fishing is the #1 gateway activity, outdoor activities, we just thought there was a natural connection with trying to bring kids and fishing together. And throughout the years at RBFF, we've given a lot of grant dollars out to aquatic education organizations and other organizations that focus on youth, and with mixed results. Okay, I'll be quite honest with you. For spending the same amount of dollars today, we are reaching far more kids than we ever have before. And I think getting in mass some of these things going, I think, are going to be critical to the future. So let me talk a little bit about our program with Discovery. It's called Explore the Blue. It's brought to you by Take Me Fishing. And as the previous panel talked about, the Kaiser report that tells how many hours kids are spending with technology and video and stuff. We've done this as a web-based program, not only for kids though, but for educators, families, and children. And the reason we chose Discovery Education as a partner is that every state in this country has what we would call standards of learning. And in math, science, social science, language arts, physical education, across the board. And any programs that are developed to have any chance of succeeding in the school systems or being adopted by school systems, they must teach to those standards of learning. And Discovery Education and Discovery Communication have been in schools for many, many years. And their programs align with those standards of learning in all 50 states. So we had an opportunity working with them to develop curriculum that science teachers, math teachers, language arts teachers, physical education teachers could use in the classroom that bring fishing and boating and conservation to life. And we do this through this portal called Explore the Blue. Right now, the program objective is pretty simple. Stimulate students' imagination and instill lifelong connection to the outdoors. Reinforce commitment to environmental stewardship. The other part of our mission from increasing participation is also develop the next generation of environmental stewards. Address the need for environmental conservation and outdoor education resources in the classroom. And ultimately, increase participation in fishing and boating. This was originally a fairly hard sell with my board of directors. A lot of them, my board is made up of what I affectionately call the 5 families. The fishing industry, which is fishing tackle manufacturers, the boating industry, which is led by boating manufacturers, state fish and wildlife agencies, a FACA committee, the Sport Fish Boating Partnership Council, and of course the Fish and Wildlife Service. And a lot of the business entities within my board, which would make up about 50% of the board, couldn't understand why we were going to spend what turns out to be about 15% of our budget on these youth programs, and this one being the biggest of those. Because, you know, it's a K through 5 program. So these kids won't be buying boats for, I don't know, probably 20 years, or they may not be buying a fishing license for 10 or 12 years. But I think it's important to, one of the philosophies we have, and again, going back to the research, it's important that we gauge kids at a young age. So we were able to get this through with the caveat that, you know, it needs to meet its objectives. And so far it has. The online curriculum center within Explore the Blue has 28 standards-aligned lessons plans, including videos, multimedia tools that reach across all those subject areas in K through 5. It has a habitat map. It has a game. Now, it doesn't have an avatar, but I wrote that down. That's on my notes here. That we can certainly put that into the game so the kids can create images of themselves and go from there. But more importantly, all these curriculum have outdoor components. So it's not only it starts in the classroom, but they actually have to go out with their parents to complete the projects. They have to go to a park. They have to go to a lake. They have to go out on a trail. There's different components. They have to understand